Have you ever made a decision in the blink of an eye, thinking it was a simple, unimportant act, only to later realize it changed your life in ways you could never have predicted? Imagine, for a moment, standing in the middle of a cold, grey street, witnessing someone in desperate need. You look around, there's no one else to help. It's freezing. And without thinking, you reach for your scarf, the one you've had for years, the one that feels like home every time you wrap it around your neck. You hand it to the shivering man, his face gaunt and worn by years of hardship. He smiles weakly at you, his eyes filled with gratitude. You don't think much of it, just another good deed, right? But what happens next is something you could never have predicted, a twist so wild and unexpected, it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about kindness, fate, and the strange ways the universe works. This isn't just any story. No, this is a tale that will make you pause and think, what if that happened to me? You see, the man she helped wasn't just an ordinary person, and the life she returned to after that moment would never be the same again. In fact, what happened next is so unbelievable, so extraordinary, that even the most skeptical among you will be left wondering, is this real? Could this happen to me? So why does this story matter to you? Why should you keep watching? Because what you're about to hear will make you question the small, seemingly insignificant choices you make every day. You'll start to wonder, what if one simple act of kindness could open doors to unimaginable worlds? And what if, just maybe, you could be swept away into an adventure so incredible, you'd never want to leave? You'll discover how one woman's unassuming gesture propelled her into a world beyond her wildest dreams, a world filled with secrets, grandeur, and danger. You'll be taken on a journey where the line between reality and fantasy blurs, where trust becomes your most precious commodity, and where the truth is hidden in plain sight. But before we dive in, I need you to stop right here. I want you to really think about this. How often do we walk past others, oblivious to the way our actions could change their lives, or ours? The truth is, we all make choices every day that could alter the course of our lives. And today, you're going to learn just how one woman's act of kindness sparked a chain of events that led to a mystery, an invitation, and a life she never imagined. But that's just the beginning. What happens next will shake your perception of fate and chance, and it will leave you wondering about the strange and inexplicable ways the universe weaves its tapestry. But what happens when the person you helped turns out to be someone far more important than you ever could have imagined? What happens when a seemingly random act of kindness leads to an invitation to a world you couldn't even dream up if you tried? It sounds like a fairy tale, right? But what if it's not? What if it's real? Let me set the scene for you. It was an ordinary afternoon when she saw him, a man standing alone on the street corner, his back hunched against the wind. His clothes were tattered, and his face was pale, almost sickly in the harsh winter light. He was shivering, his breath coming in visible puffs as he pulled his coat tighter around him. The street was busy, people rushing to and from work, wrapped in their own worlds, too absorbed in their own lives to notice the man who needed help. She saw it, though. She always had an eye for the underdog, the ones who got overlooked. Her heart ached for him. Maybe it was because her own life hadn't been so easy, and she remembered what it was like to feel invisible, to struggle without anyone noticing. And so, without thinking twice, she pulled her scarf off her neck and walked toward him. She didn't know why she did it. She could have kept walking, kept her scarf, kept her distance. But something in her wouldn't let her. She offered him the scarf, just a small gesture, but one that would set off a chain reaction she could never have foreseen. She handed it to him, the fabric soft and warm, and he looked up at her with such a mixture of surprise and gratitude that for a moment, she could feel the weight of the world shift between them. He didn't say much, just mumbled a quiet thank you, before wrapping the scarf around his neck. And that should have been the end of it. A simple act of kindness, a moment of human connection in an often cold world. But then, as she turned to leave, he called out to her. "Wait," he said, his voice low but urgent. "You've done something for me, and I want to repay you." She paused, not quite sure what to make of his words. He continued, "I have a place you could stay. A place far from here, a place where you'll be safe, where you'll never have to worry again." Her heart raced. The idea of being safe, truly safe, was a thought she had never entertained before. She hadn't been in a position to be safe in years. The streets were her home, for better or worse. But something about the man's words struck her. The way he spoke, as if he knew her better than anyone else. He wasn't asking for anything in return, yet there was an air of mystery about him, something that drew her in. She took a deep breath, weighing her options. The world she knew was filled with uncertainty, danger, and struggle. And here was this man, offering her something better, something more. But who was he really? And why would he offer this? And that, right there, was the question she couldn't answer. But she knew she had to find out. What happened next was something straight out of a fairy tale. She followed him, and within hours, she was on a journey that would lead her to a place she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams, a castle hidden from the world, its walls steeped in history, its corridors filled with secrets. But behind the grandeur, behind the mystery, was something darker. Something that would change everything. The man who had once seemed like just another stranger was more than he appeared. And the invitation to his castle, to his world, was just the beginning of a much larger, much more dangerous game. Now, you're probably wondering, who is this man? Why did he invite her into his world? Trust me, you'll want to keep watching to find out. Because the answers you're searching for will unfold piece by piece. The deeper we go into the story, the more questions will arise and the more shocking the twists will be. So, I ask you to stick with me. Don't click away. Because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about fate, about kindness, and about the mysterious forces that govern our lives. Stay tuned, and let's see where this incredible journey takes us. But remember, the story's just getting started. You haven't even scratched the surface yet. The days leading up to that fateful encounter had been anything but ordinary for her. Her name was Emily, a woman in her mid-20s, trying to navigate the mess of life with only the barest semblance of control. She wasn't the kind of person who sought out adventure or dreamed of living in a castle, far from it. In fact, she had spent the last year of her life trying to keep her head above water, juggling multiple jobs that barely paid the bills and dealing with the emotional toll of a recent breakup that left her feeling hollow, as if a part of her had simply disappeared. She lived in a cramped apartment in the city, far from the glamorous lives of the influencers she saw on social media. Life wasn't a fairy tale for Emily. It was a series of small, difficult decisions, made one after the other, just to make it through the day. Emily hadn't been a stranger to hardship. Her childhood had been spent in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, but very few offered a helping hand when it was needed most. Her family had been fractured by secrets that only grew more insidious as time went on. Her father had disappeared when she was just a teenager, and her mother, a woman whose warmth had once filled their home, had grown distant and preoccupied, lost in a haze of stress and depression. Emily had learned early on how to take care of herself. And yet, despite her independence, there was always a lingering loneliness that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She had few friends, and those she did have seemed to be wrapped up in their own lives, often too busy to notice her struggles. This isolation made it easier for her to blend into the background, a face in the crowd, a woman no one paid much attention to until the moment when she decided to help that man on the street. But in the weeks leading up to that moment, there had been something strange happening in her life, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, yet couldn't ignore. It all started when she began receiving mysterious letters. They were addressed to her, but the sender's name was always either missing or written in a cursive script she didn't recognize. The letters were strange, cryptic in nature, and sometimes even unsettling. The first one had been simple enough: your choices will change everything. Look beyond the surface. At first, Emily thought it was some kind of prank, maybe a marketing gimmick or some odd coincidence. But the letters kept coming, each one more detailed, more personal. One letter mentioned a specific moment in her past, something that no one could have known unless they had been watching her every move. The words were chilling, but they also intrigued her, a part of her curious to know more, another part of her feeling deeply uneasy. She kept the letters hidden away, thinking they were harmless until the day she met the man. Now, looking back, Emily couldn't help but wonder, had the letters been a warning? A prelude to what was about to unfold? The thought made her shiver. She hadn't shared the letters with anyone, not her friends, not her family, because, to be honest, she didn't know what to make of them. But deep down, She suspected they were somehow connected to the strange man she had helped on that freezing afternoon. As she followed him that day, through dark, winding streets and alleys she didn't recognize, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation settle heavily on her shoulders. Her curiosity was piqued, but so was her instinct to be cautious, to question every step. The man didn't speak much as they walked, but there was an unsettling air about him, something about the way he moved, as if he was both in control and somehow disconnected from the world around him. His silence only added to the growing tension. And the more she walked, the more she began to wonder, who was this man really? And why was he offering her something so extravagant, an invitation to a castle, no less, without a single explanation? She had been on the streets enough to know when someone was hiding something, and the man, with his quiet demeanor and unspoken promises, had mystery written all over him. Her thoughts wandered back to the letters. Could they be linked to him? Could he be the one behind them? It seemed unlikely, but the coincidence felt too strange to ignore. And yet, as they neared the entrance to the castle, Emily began to wonder whether the situation was even stranger than she could have imagined. The architecture that loomed ahead of her was breathtaking, vast, towering spires and intricately carved stonework that seemed to belong in a world far removed from anything she had ever known. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, but as she crossed the threshold into the dark, echoing halls, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. Her footsteps echoed in the grand foyer as they entered the castle, the door closing behind her with an unsettling finality. She glanced around nervously, her eyes adjusting to the dimly lit space, but the interior was as elegant and pristine as the exterior had promised. There were no servants, no other visitors, just her and the man who had led her here. His name, she learned, was Gregory, though she couldn't bring herself to trust that name, or his story. He had told her he was a wealthy landowner with a long history tied to the castle, a place that had been in his family for generations. But there was something off about the way he spoke, something rehearsed in his words, as if he had said them too many times to be genuine. As the evening went on, Emily began to notice odd details that didn't quite add up. There were no windows in the main hall, only portraits and tapestries that depicted scenes of battles long past. The food, while exquisite, was served by unseen hands, no staff in sight, not a single servant to be found. The hallways seemed endless, twisting in strange directions that didn't make sense when compared to the blueprints she had once seen of old castles in her history books. She tried to ask Gregory about these things, but each time she did, he would change the subject with an ease that made her uneasy. It was as though he knew exactly what she was thinking, exactly what she would ask, and he was always one step ahead. And then, there was the matter of the other guests, or rather, the absence of them. Emily had expected some sort of gathering, maybe even a lavish party. But as the night wore on, she realized that she was the only guest, and Gregory was the only one who seemed to have any real authority here. The more she stayed in the castle, the more the unease settled in her chest. There was something about the place, something hidden beneath the surface that didn't sit right with her. The castle, with all its grandeur, felt suffocating in its silence. It was as though it was waiting for something or someone, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had been brought here for a reason she had yet to understand. Could Gregory be hiding something from her? Could he be the one behind the letters? Or was she simply caught up in a game much larger than she could comprehend? Each question only led to more confusion, and as the night stretched on, the weight of the mystery grew heavier. And somewhere, deep in the bowels of the castle, hidden behind layers of ancient stone, the answers she sought were just beginning to stir, answers that would change her life in ways that could never be undone. But what would they reveal? That, she couldn't yet know. But soon, very soon, she would have no choice but to find out. As the castle's doors shut behind her, Emily couldn't help but wonder, had she made the right choice? Or had she just walked into something far darker than she ever imagined? The night in the castle stretched longer than Emily had anticipated. The more time she spent there, the more she felt like a guest in a dream that was quickly turning into a nightmare. She had barely touched her food, too distracted by the oddness of her surroundings and the inexplicable sense that something wasn't right. Gregory had been an impeccable host, guiding her through the vast halls, offering small talk that felt strangely calculated. But the more they spoke, the more Emily realized how little he actually told her about the castle itself, its history, or even its inhabitants. It was as if he were withholding the most important details, keeping her at arm's length despite the hospitality. The walls around her seemed to close in tighter with each passing minute. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking on eggshells, as if every word, every action was being observed, analyzed, and perhaps even controlled. Then, the first thing happened that truly unsettled her. After a few hours, she found herself alone in a small library at the back of the castle. It was a room that seemed untouched by time, the bookshelves lined with ancient texts, their spines worn and faded. There was an old, ornate desk in the corner, papers scattered on top, some of them half covered in dust, others with ink smudges that hinted at hurried writing. Emily couldn't help herself. She was drawn to it, the curiosity bubbling up again, urging her to dig deeper. She leafed through some of the papers, mostly old letters and documents that didn't make much sense. Then, she found something that caught her eye, an old map of the castle grounds, marked with strange symbols. It looked ancient, far older than anything Gregory had mentioned. Her pulse quickened as she examined it, the realization dawning on her that there were areas of the castle marked on the map that weren't part of the tour he had given her. Hidden chambers. Secret passages. She couldn't resist. She tucked the map under her arm and made her way toward the hidden hallway she believed the map referred to, her mind racing with questions. But when she reached the end of the hallway, where the secret passage should have been, it was gone. The wall in front of her was solid stone, as if it had never been there. She checked the map again, there was no mistake. The passage should have been there, but now, it was like it had vanished without a trace. Panic began to rise in her chest. Had she imagined it? Had someone erased it? She couldn't make sense of it, but before she could dwell on it too much, she heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, she shoved the map into her jacket, hoping to slip away before anyone noticed she was out of place. It was Gregory, walking down the hallway with a slight smile on his face, as though he had been expecting her all along. "I was wondering where you'd gone," he said smoothly, his eyes searching hers. "The night can feel long in these old walls. But I'd prefer it if you didn't wander too far without me. There are parts of this castle that are best left unexplored." His tone was friendly, almost charming, but there was something underneath it that made Emily's stomach turn. She couldn't tell if it was genuine concern or something more sinister, something that told her he had been watching her all along. She smiled weakly, trying to mask the unease she felt. "I just needed some air," she lied, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she couldn't tell him what she had found, not now. Not when she was still so unsure of everything. Gregory gave a slight nod, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand. But I must insist, there are things in this castle, things you're better off not seeing. Trust me, Emily, some doors are better left unopened." His voice was firm now, with an edge to it that sent a chill down her spine. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, as though he were warning her, but she couldn't understand why. Emily swallowed hard, feeling trapped. She nodded, trying to play along, but inside, a new layer of suspicion was growing. What had she stumbled onto? And why did Gregory seem so intent on keeping her away from certain parts of the castle? What was he hiding? Later that evening, as she lay in the guest room, the words from earlier echoed in her mind. Some doors are better left unopened. She tossed and turned, unable to sleep, her mind racing. She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Gregory was hiding something big, something that tied directly into the mystery of the castle. Her curiosity and instinct told her to keep searching, to keep digging, but the longer she stayed, the more she felt like she was playing a dangerous game. Yet, as she drifted off into a restless sleep, something deep inside told her that she couldn't back away now. She had to keep going. The next morning, Emily went back to the library to look for any other clues that might help her piece things together. She was hoping to find more of the old papers, the ones that had seemed so cryptic but full of hidden knowledge. But when she arrived, she found the desk completely empty. The papers were gone. The books, the map, everything was gone, as if it had never existed in the first place. Emily's heart sank. It was as though someone had deliberately erased any trace of what she had discovered, and for the first time, the weight of the situation truly hit her. This wasn't just a strange series of coincidences. This was deliberate. Someone didn't want her to know the truth. But why? Her mind began to race with possibilities. Could Gregory have found out what she was looking at? Had he removed the evidence to keep her from digging deeper? Or was there someone else involved, someone more dangerous, lurking in the shadows of the castle? Emily couldn't help but think back to the strange letters she had received in the past. Was the person who had sent them watching her now? Had they known she'd come here, known she would start asking questions? That afternoon, as she wandered through the castle grounds, Emily noticed something else that made her skin crawl. A shadow moving in the distance, just out of sight. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She paused, straining her eyes, but the shadow was gone as quickly as it appeared. Her heart pounded as she felt a sudden, intense sense of being followed. The walls of the castle, once imposing and majestic, now seemed oppressive and suffocating. And as she turned to head back inside, her gaze landed on something even more unsettling, a figure standing at the end of the hall, watching her. It was a woman, dressed in a dark, flowing gown that seemed out of place in the modern world. Her hair was dark, her expression unreadable. Emily couldn't tell if she was someone who worked in the castle or if she was just another guest. But the way the woman looked at her, cold, appraising, made Emily's skin crawl. The woman didn't speak, just stood there, staring, as if waiting for something. It was then that Emily realized something truly chilling. There were more people in this castle than she had been told about. And some of them, it seemed, were not here to welcome her, they were here to watch her. With a growing sense of dread, Emily turned away from the mysterious figure and retreated to her room. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Who could she trust? Was Gregory part of this? Was there some hidden conspiracy within these walls, a secret so dangerous that anyone who sought to uncover it would be silenced? As the door to her room clicked shut behind her, she realized one thing with certainty: the deeper she dug, the more dangerous things would become. And just as she turned to face the mirror, she froze. There, in the reflection behind her, was the woman from the hall, standing in her room, watching her, silent as ever. Who was she? What did she want? And why was she there? The answers, it seemed, were just out of reach. But one thing was clear: the truth she sought would not come easily. Emily's pulse quickened as she turned away from the mirror, heart hammering in her chest. She had felt something watching her, but seeing the reflection, the woman standing right behind her, was something far more sinister than she could have imagined. The figure, her dark eyes piercing through the shadows, didn't move or speak. The silence in the room grew deafening, suffocating. For a moment, Emily wasn't sure if she was losing her mind, but the weight of the woman's gaze felt too real to ignore. With a sharp intake of breath, Emily spun around, but the room was empty. The woman was gone. It felt as though the world had stopped turning, as if the castle itself had swallowed her whole, leaving Emily isolated in the unsettling quiet. Her heart pounded in her chest as her mind raced, trying to rationalize the impossible. Had it been a hallucination? Had it been a trick of the light? Or was there truly something, someone, here that she wasn't supposed to see? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp knock at the door. She froze, unsure whether to open it. She didn't feel like confronting anyone, not now, not after everything that had already happened. But curiosity got the better of her, and after a few moments, she slowly made her way to the door, every instinct telling her to be cautious. As her fingers wrapped around the cold doorknob, a strange sense of déjà vu washed over her. She hesitated, but then opened it. To her surprise, standing in the doorway was James. He was one of the few people Emily trusted, a childhood friend who had, in recent months, become the one person she could confide in, someone who knew her better than anyone else. James was a bit older than her, with a calm, steady demeanor that made him feel like an anchor in her otherwise chaotic life. He had a way of keeping things grounded when everything around her seemed to spiral out of control. The two had met for coffee just a few days before she left for the castle, and though Emily had told him little about the strange events that had started unfolding, she could tell he was concerned. He had always been the cautious type, and when she hadn't been able to reach him for a day or two, she'd worried that he might be just as lost in his own world as she was in hers. But seeing him now, standing there in the doorway, there was something different about him. His face was tense, a faint look of apprehension in his eyes. There was a faint bruising under his left eye, something she hadn't noticed the last time they spoke. "James?" Emily asked, trying to mask the surprise in her voice, the unease that had been steadily creeping up on her since she arrived in the castle. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his gaze darting around the room as if he were looking for something or someone. He shut the door behind him with a quiet thud, his expression tight. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. "Something's going on. And I think it's connected to you." His words hit her like a bolt of lightning. For a second, she couldn't breathe. Connected to her? Before she could respond, James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was crumpled, as though he had been carrying it for days, unsure whether to show it to her. But what made her blood run cold was the fact that it looked exactly like the letters she had been receiving. Same cursive handwriting. Same cryptic message. "I got one too," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not a prank, Emily. I've been getting them, too. They said we both need to stop looking into the castle. They warned me to stay away from you. And they said," he paused, his voice faltering, as if the next words were too much to bear. "They said that if you don't stop digging, things will get worse." The room seemed to close in on her as the weight of James's words settled into her mind. Her first instinct was to push him away, to tell him he was overreacting. But she knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about him. It was about something far larger, something dangerous. The letters. The strange encounters. The mysterious woman. Everything was connected, but how? Why? And who was behind it all? "James," Emily began, but her voice caught in her throat. How could she explain everything? The letters, the strange things happening in the castle, the woman in the mirror? She didn't even know where to begin. The last thing she wanted was to drag him into this mess, but the fact that he was here, standing in front of her, clearly shaken, made it impossible to ignore. There was no way he could have known what had been happening to her unless he, too, had been targeted. This wasn't just her problem anymore. This was something much bigger. "I thought it was just you," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I was the only one who'd been getting those letters. I didn't want to tell anyone, didn't want to seem crazy, you know? But now it's all unraveling. I don't know who to trust, James." James stepped forward, grabbing her hand with urgency. His grip was tight, his eyes locked onto hers. "Emily, this is bigger than you think. We're not the only ones they've contacted. I've heard rumors, seen things I shouldn't have seen. There's a network of people who are connected to the castle, and whatever's going on here, it's been going on for years. There's a reason people are disappearing. People have been disappearing from that place, Emily. And I think you're being pulled into something that's much more dangerous than you realize." Emily stared at him, her mind reeling. This was worse than she had imagined. People disappearing? That didn't sound like a coincidence. And the fact that James had been receiving threats as well, who was behind this? What did they want? And how far would they go to stop her from uncovering the truth? Her heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. She couldn't back down now. She couldn't let whatever this was take hold of her life, or James's. But then, just as the tension in the room seemed unbearable, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Emily's stomach dropped. James gave her a quick, warning look. He looked panicked now, as if he knew something she didn't. "Don't answer it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "If it's them." But before he could finish, the door opened, revealing Gregory standing there, his calm demeanor still present, but there was something different about him. His eyes were colder, more calculating than before. "You've been snooping around again, Emily," Gregory said, his voice smooth but with an underlying threat. "I warned you about this. And now, James, it seems you've found yourself involved too." James stepped in front of Emily instinctively, his body tense with hostility. "We're done listening to you," he said, his tone firm. "You don't control her. You don't control us." Gregory's lips twisted into a smile, but it wasn't one of amusement, it was something far darker, more knowing. "You should be careful what you wish for," he said quietly, before stepping back out of the room, leaving them both standing in stunned silence. Emily's mind spun as the door clicked shut. What had just happened? Why had Gregory seemed so prepared for this moment? And more importantly, who was he really? With each passing second, the web of mystery surrounding the castle grew thicker. And now, with both James and Emily in the crosshairs, there was only one thing she knew for sure: the deeper they dug, the more perilous things would become. And they had just uncovered a dangerous new layer of the truth. But what was waiting for them next? The stakes were higher than ever, and the answers were getting closer and more elusive by the minute. The next morning came with an unsettling sense of dread that clung to Emily like a second skin. Despite the night's revelations, despite everything she'd learned in the past few hours, the sun seemed to rise in the same way it always had. But everything was different. The air felt colder, the sky bluer, as though the world around her was trying to fool her into thinking that things were normal. But she couldn't pretend anymore. Not after what had happened last night. She hadn't told James everything. Not about the woman in the mirror, or how the hallways of the castle seemed to shift and change. How the walls themselves felt alive, watching her with every step. Even though the fear clawed at her from the inside, Emily had tried to focus on the task at hand, trying to find a way to uncover the truth. But now, with Gregory's cryptic warning and the unnerving presence of the mysterious figure, it felt like everything was spiraling out of control. There was no longer any illusion of safety. There was no longer any comfort in the thought that she could just walk away from it all. That morning, Emily had tried to reach out to James. Her fingers had hovered over the phone screen, her thumb hovering over his name, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to drag him further into this, but she couldn't ignore the fact that his life was at risk as well. But as the hours passed, her attempts to contact him went unanswered. She texted. She called. Nothing. No reply. Nothing. The silence between them grew unbearable, a knot tightening in her stomach. She pushed the worry down, telling herself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was busy, maybe he had something to take care of. But a creeping sense of fear gnawed at her thoughts, growing stronger with each passing minute. By midday, she couldn't stand it any longer. The constant whisper of anxiety in the back of her mind drove her out of the castle and into the surrounding woods. She needed to think. She needed clarity. The trees, thick and ancient, loomed above her like silent witnesses to the confusion that clouded her thoughts. As Emily walked deeper into the woods, the sense of being watched grew stronger. It was subtle at first, a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, a rustling in the leaves. But soon, it became undeniable. Someone was following her. She knew it. Her pace quickened, and so did the footsteps behind her. The paranoia she had been fighting to ignore now consumed her. Every sound, every crack in the earth, every rustling of the wind sent her heart racing. She turned a corner, then another, only to find that the footsteps kept pace, echoing her every move. Whoever it was, they weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. They were following her openly, without shame, without fear. At the edge of the woods, she reached the stone wall that surrounded the castle grounds. She could feel her breath quicken, panic bubbling in her chest. She needed to get back inside. She needed to get to safety. As she turned to retreat toward the castle, she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the trees, hidden in the underbrush, watching her with a piercing gaze. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared. Emily's heart slammed against her ribcage, her body frozen in place as her mind screamed at her to run. She didn't even think. She just sprinted back toward the castle, her legs burning, the air sharp in her lungs. By the time she reached the front door, she was panting, wild-eyed, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the door handle. She pushed her way inside, slamming it behind her and locking it with trembling hands. She leaned against the door, trying to steady her breath, her thoughts spiraling out of control. Who was following her? And why? But the safety of the castle was fleeting. Just as Emily turned to try to make sense of what had just happened, a loud, sudden crash from upstairs shook her to her core. The sound reverberated through the halls, echoing with such force that it rattled her bones. Something was wrong. Something had happened. She didn't wait to find out what. She ran up the stairs, her feet moving faster than her mind could process, her heart hammering in her chest. At the top of the stairs, Emily's worst fears were confirmed. The door to her room was wide open, the room itself completely disheveled. Drawers had been pulled open and their contents scattered across the floor. Papers, her papers, the ones she had been studying, were torn apart, littering the ground like confetti. And in the center of it all, there was something far worse. James's phone, lying face down on the bed. But it wasn't just the phone that terrified her. It was the blood-stained note she found lying beside it. She picked it up with shaking hands, her mind racing as she read the chilling words written in the same cursive script from the letters. If you want to see him again, you'll stop digging. You're not ready for what you'll find. Leave now, or the consequences will be irreversible. Her breath caught in her throat, a wave of nausea washing over her. This was no longer just a mystery. This was a direct threat. They had taken James. Whoever they were, whatever they wanted, it was clear now that they were willing to hurt those she cared about to get her to stop. But stopping wasn't an option anymore. She couldn't turn back. Emily's mind raced. Who was behind all of this? Gregory? The mysterious woman in the mirror? The figure who had been following her in the woods? Or was it someone else entirely, someone hidden in the shadows, pulling the strings from behind the scenes? She had to find James. She had to. But the question now was, how far was she willing to go to uncover the truth? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. Emily pulled it out, hoping against hope that it was a message from James, some sign that he was still alive. But when she saw the screen, her heart sank even further. It was a single message. From an unknown number. It's too late for you. You've made your choice. Now, you'll pay the price. The words were simple, but they sent a cold shiver down her spine. Someone was watching her every move. They knew where she was. And they weren't going to stop until they had everything they wanted. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself. There was no going back now. She had no choice but to dive deeper into the darkness, no choice but to keep looking, to keep fighting for answers. But the more she uncovered, the more it felt like she was walking right into a trap that had been set for her from the very beginning. And the worst part, she couldn't shake the feeling that the people she thought she could trust might be the ones setting it all up. Emily's world had been a whirlwind of confusion, paranoia, and fear, but nothing prepared her for what she discovered next. As she paced back and forth in the now familiar, cold stone room, her thoughts were consumed by James's disappearance and the cryptic messages that had begun to haunt her. Her mind raced, spinning through all the possibilities, who could be behind this, why they were targeting her, and what they wanted. She'd checked every corner of the castle, every piece of evidence she could find, but it all felt like pieces of a puzzle that wouldn't fit together. Nothing made sense. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized there was something important she had missed. A detail that, if she could unravel it, could bring the entire mystery into focus. The sharp, sudden sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. She froze, the hair on the back of her neck standing up. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hadn't heard anyone approach. Her heart thudded in her chest as she moved cautiously toward the door, barely able to control the surge of anxiety that washed over her. She gripped the door handle, holding her breath, before opening it just a crack. Standing there, in the hallway, was Gregory. Emily's stomach turned. It was the last person she wanted to see, but also the one person who might have answers. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, there was no longer the cold, calculating stranger who had warned her before. Instead, there was something else, something softer, almost vulnerable. "Emily, we need to talk," Gregory said, his voice surprisingly calm. She hesitated, unsure of what his words meant now. She had trusted him, or at least thought she had. After all, he was one of the few people she'd confided in about the mysterious happenings in the castle. But now, after everything that had happened, James's disappearance, the threats, the cryptic letters, her trust felt like a fragile thread. It wasn't that she didn't want to hear what Gregory had to say, it was that she feared the truth would be more terrifying than anything she had imagined. Reluctantly, she stepped aside, allowing him into the room. He didn't waste any time. He walked to the center of the room, his posture tense, as though the weight of the situation was suddenly taking a toll on him. I should have told you sooner, he began, running a hand through his hair. But there's no easy way to say this. What's happening to you, it's not random. It's not just some curse or coincidence. It's part of something much bigger. And I'm sorry you're caught up in it. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Her mind, already reeling from everything she had uncovered, struggled to process what Gregory was saying. Something bigger? What does he mean? You're being used, Gregory continued, his voice low and almost apologetic. And it's my fault. I never meant for this to happen. But you need to understand. I never thought it would go this far. What do you mean? Emily's voice cracked, barely able to keep up with the dizzying speed of her thoughts. She had no idea where this was going, but something inside her felt the unmistakable weight of an impending revelation, something so big that it might break everything she thought she knew about the castle, about herself, and about Gregory. He took a deep breath, his eyes haunted. The letters you've been getting, the threats against you and James, they're all part of a plan. A plan that was set in motion a long time ago. And the truth is, you're not the first person to be caught up in it. Emily's chest tightened as she tried to piece together what he was saying. A plan? What plan? Gregory seemed to hesitate, like he was grappling with whether or not he should reveal the entire truth. His gaze dropped to the floor, and when he spoke again, his words were so quiet she had to strain to hear them. You weren't supposed to come here. Not like this. The castle, it wasn't supposed to be found. But when you did, when you uncovered the letters, you triggered something. Something ancient, something that the people who built this place never wanted anyone to discover. Emily's mind was spinning. Who built this place? What was he talking about? Gregory's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Emily saw a flicker of guilt, a kind of remorse that she hadn't expected from him. I never thought you'd get this far. I thought I could keep you away from all of it. But now, the fact that you've seen the castle the way you have, it changes everything. They know. They've been watching you. They're waiting for you to make a mistake. He took a step closer to her, his voice dropping even further. You're not supposed to be involved, Emily. Not in this. And I'm not the person you think I am. The last sentence hit her like a punch to the gut. Emily took a step back, trying to absorb the weight of what he had just said. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Who are you really, Gregory? His eyes narrowed, and for a fleeting moment, Emily saw something else in him, something that chilled her to her very core. It wasn't just guilt. It was something darker. Something far more dangerous. I'm sorry, he said, his voice shaking now. I never wanted you to find out this way. But you deserve to know the truth. Then, without another word, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, weathered book, its edges worn and torn as if it had been passed down through generations. He handed it to her with a look that was a mix of sorrow and something else, fear. This is the key, he whispered. Everything you've been looking for, it's all here. But you won't like what you find. Emily's fingers trembled as she took the book from him, the weight of it almost too much to bear. She looked down at the cover, which was embossed with strange symbols that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. The same symbols that had been hidden in the castle's oldest rooms. Symbols that had appeared in the letters she'd received. Symbols she had never understood until now. Before she could open the book, before she could ask him any more questions, Gregory turned on his heel, his face ashen. You need to leave, he said, his voice desperate. Before they find you. And with that, he was gone, disappearing down the hallway before Emily could even process what had just happened. Her heart raced as she stood there, the book heavy in her hands. Something had just shifted. Something fundamental had been revealed, and it left her feeling more confused and terrified than ever. Gregory had said it himself, she wasn't supposed to be here. But the question remained, why? And who, exactly, had she been trusting all this time? As Emily flipped the book open, she realized that the answers she was looking for were just a page away. But the deeper she delved, the more she wondered, had she unknowingly stepped into something much darker than she ever could have imagined? Was it too late to turn back now? Or was this the moment when everything would finally make sense? And just as she began reading, a sudden noise at the door made her freeze. The silence that followed Gregory's sudden departure weighed heavy on Emily's chest, each beat of her heart feeling like an echo of something much darker, much more terrifying, than she was prepared for. She stood there, frozen in the center of the room, her hands gripping the old book, the weight of its mysterious presence pulling her toward a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. The words on the page seemed to blur, shifting with the dim light of the room, as if the book itself was alive, pulling her into something she had no choice but to see. But the real question wasn't what the book contained, it was whether she was even willing to open it at all. Her mind raced. Gregory's confession had cracked something wide open in her that she hadn't expected. There had been guilt, yes, but there had also been fear. Fear not for himself, but for her. That much was clear. He had been trying to protect her, but the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like his actions weren't just about her safety. There was something larger at play here, something she couldn't grasp. She wasn't just a bystander in this story, she was central to it, whether she liked it or not. But at what cost? Was she willing to sacrifice everything to uncover the truth? Because the more she dug, the more she realized that every step forward felt like it was pulling her deeper into a web that was about to close in on her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door creaking open. A chill ran down her spine. She wasn't alone. She turned quickly, her pulse spiking as her eyes met the figure standing in the doorway. It was James. Or at least, it looked like James. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed by something Emily couldn't quite place. But it wasn't just his appearance that unsettled her, it was the way he was standing there, almost too calm, almost as if he'd been expecting her. "You shouldn't have come here, Emily," he said softly, his voice low and almost hollow. "You don't know what you're messing with." For a moment, the room seemed to spin. This wasn't the James she knew. The man standing before her wasn't the one who had shared late-night conversations with her, laughing at silly jokes, supporting her through the tough times. No, this was someone else, someone who was suddenly colder, more distant, and strangely off. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach as a chill swept through her veins. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky, but she couldn't hide the underlying tremor of suspicion that had begun to creep into her words. "James, what's going on? You've been gone for hours. Where have you been?" His gaze darkened, and for a second, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that reminded her of the very fear that had been growing inside her since the moment she stepped into this castle. "You don't understand. There are things in motion now that you can't undo. People, dangerous people, are watching us. They've been watching you." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, and for the first time since she'd met him, Emily felt a shiver of dread at the way he was looking at her. There was something too calculated in his gaze, something that felt too rehearsed, too planned. "And if you don't stop right now, Emily, there's no going back. They'll come for you. They'll come for everyone you love." His words were a gut punch. The way he said everyone you love made her blood run cold. She felt like the ground beneath her feet had shifted, like she was standing on the edge of something vast and uncharted, and if she made one wrong move, she'd fall into the unknown. "James, you're scaring me," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of her emotions. "What do you mean by they? Who's watching us?" Instead of answering her, James turned and walked toward the window, staring out into the fog that had begun to settle outside. The dim light of dusk made his profile look sharp, almost ghostly. "You don't want to know," he muttered, his voice quieter now, almost lost in the wind. "Some truths are better left untouched, Emily. The past we're both running from, well, it's not just some fairy tale. It's real. It's dangerous. And if you want to survive this, you need to stop asking questions. You need to turn away from all of this." But Emily could feel the tension, the pull of something greater than either of them. The truth was out there, and she couldn't stop herself from reaching for it. She couldn't unsee what she had already seen. But what was it that made James suddenly act this way? What was he trying to protect her from? And why did he seem so intent on keeping her from the truth? "I can't just turn away, James," she said, her voice firm, her mind made up. "You disappeared, and now you're back, and you're telling me to stop. To ignore everything. No. There's more going on here, and I need to know what it is. I need to know why you're acting like this." Her heart ached as she spoke, because a part of her was still reaching for the man she thought she knew, the one who had cared for her, the one who hadn't been afraid to stand by her side. But right now, all she saw was a stranger. A man who seemed more like a puppet than someone with his own agency. And that hurt more than anything else. James turned back toward her, his face tight with a mix of frustration and something else, something she couldn't identify. "You're not listening," he snapped. "You're not hearing me. This isn't a choice anymore. They've given you one. Stop, or everything will fall apart. They'll come for you, for me, for anyone close to you. They won't stop until they have what they want, and what they want is you." The words stung like a slap to her face, but Emily didn't flinch. She wasn't going to let him scare her into submission. But there it was, the choice, the impossible decision that had been placed before her. She could stop digging, walk away, and protect herself and the people she loved. Or she could continue, defy everything, and risk everything, even if it meant losing herself in the process. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at James, her mind torn between the man she thought she knew and the terrifying stranger standing before her. What had he gotten involved in? What was he hiding? And more importantly, was he lying to her? Before she could speak again, the air around them shifted, the tension in the room suddenly becoming unbearable. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she grabbed it, hoping for some clarity. The message was from an unknown number. One simple sentence. "You've made your choice. There's no going back now." Emily's blood ran cold, and she looked up at James, realizing with a sinking feeling that the clock was ticking. The game had changed. And she had no idea who, if anyone, she could trust. The walls of the castle seemed to close in on Emily as she stared down at the cryptic message on her phone. "You've made your choice. There's no going back now." The weight of those words felt suffocating, like they were crushing the air out of her lungs, and the reality of the situation began to settle in like a dark, unshakable fog. The room around her seemed to blur, her thoughts racing in 100 different directions, but one thing was clear now: she had crossed a line, and there was no retreating from this. Whatever she had started, it was no longer just about her. It wasn't just about the secrets of the castle, or the strange threats, or even Gregory's cryptic warnings. It was much bigger than that. Much more dangerous. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her back to reality. This time, it was a call, from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she hesitated, but there was no going back. She picked up, her hand trembling, barely able to contain the fear that gripped her chest. "Emily," a voice on the other end said, smooth and cold, like it was rehearsed. It wasn't James, it wasn't Gregory, it was someone else. Someone she didn't recognize. "I trust you're enjoying the game so far." The voice chuckled, but there was no humor in it. It felt like the laugh of someone who knew they had control, and that control was slipping through her fingers. "What game?" Emily demanded, her voice fierce, despite the rising panic inside her. She wasn't going to let this stranger, whoever they were, see her crack. "Who are you?" The voice on the other end paused for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "I think you already know. You've been playing it since the moment you set foot in that castle. Only, you've been too blind to see the pieces move around you." There was a soft, dangerous laugh. "You and your friends, you've been pawns in something much bigger than you could have ever imagined." Her blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What's going on here? Who's behind all of this?" The voice sighed, almost as though they were indulging her. "Oh, Emily, it's cute that you still think this is just about the castle. The truth is much more complicated, and you're not the only one who's been pulling strings in this little game. You think Gregory's the only one with secrets. You think James is your ally." The voice let out a long breath, almost pitying. "You've been played from the start. Just like the others." A chill gripped Emily's heart as her thoughts raced to the people around her, the ones she thought she could trust, the ones she had leaned on in this maze of mysteries. She thought of Gregory, who had warned her, then disappeared. She thought of James, who had acted so strangely in the last few hours, his warnings too cryptic, too desperate. It didn't make sense. And now, this voice, telling her that they were all part of a much bigger plan, a conspiracy that had ensnared everyone she knew. "Why are you doing this?" Emily choked out, the urgency mounting as she felt the walls closing in on her. "What do you want?" Want. The voice chuckled again, the sound echoing in her ear. Oh, Emily. It's not about want. It's about control. Power. And you've become a very important piece in this game, whether you like it or not. You should have stayed away. You should have never picked up the book. But now, the game's moved beyond you. Beyond anyone. The line went dead. Emily stood in the silence that followed, her pulse racing, her hands trembling. What had just happened? Who was that? And how had they known so much about her, about what she'd uncovered? But there was no time to dwell on it. The gravity of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just a pawn in this game, she was a target. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that everyone around her, everyone she'd trusted, was now under suspicion. She couldn't trust Gregory. She couldn't trust James. And she definitely couldn't trust whoever had just called her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door, the sound sharp and insistent. She jumped, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't want to answer it, didn't want to risk confronting whoever was on the other side. But there was no choice. Whoever it was had already crossed the threshold of her life, and now it was too late to turn back. She opened the door cautiously, her breath catching in her throat when she saw who it was. It was James, but he looked different now, his face pale, his eyes hollow, as if he'd seen something that had completely shattered him. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse, almost broken. "We have to go. Now. They're here. They've found us." Before she could ask him anything, before she could get a word in edgewise, James stepped forward and grabbed her by the arm, pulling her into the hallway with a force that made her stumble. His grip was tight, urgent, and there was no time for questions. She was dragged down the narrow corridor, past rooms she didn't recognize, through passages that seemed to twist and turn without end. The sounds of footsteps followed them, echoing through the castle like shadows. "We're not safe here," James muttered, his breath coming out in uneven gasps. "We never were." Emily's mind was spinning, the urgency of the situation making her pulse race faster. "What's going on, James? Who are they? What do you know?" He turned to her briefly, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know all the details, Emily, but I know enough to say we've both made a terrible mistake. We've stumbled into something that—" He paused, eyes darting toward the hallway behind them, his body stiffening. "They're already here." The panic in his voice made her stop in her tracks. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what he was saying. They'd been following them. All this time, they had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Before she could react, the sound of voices reached her ears, low, threatening, and unmistakably close. The castle's atmosphere seemed to shift, growing darker, heavier. It was no longer a place of mystery and intrigue. It was a trap. A maze that had been constructed to ensnare them all. The footsteps grew louder, and from the shadows at the end of the hallway, a figure emerged, someone she didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in black, his face obscured by a mask that seemed to flicker in the dim light. "Emily," the figure called, his voice like ice. "It's time to face the truth." Her heart froze in her chest as she realized that everything she thought she knew of the castle, the conspiracy, the people around her, was nothing more than an illusion. The truth was far more sinister, and there was no one left to trust. She was being dragged into something so much larger, so much darker than she had ever imagined. And now, the time had come to make a choice. Would she run, or would she finally confront the shadow that had been looming over her all along? There was no turning back now. Emily's heart pounded as she followed James down the darkened corridor, the heavy footsteps of their pursuers echoing in the shadows. The castle had become a maze, every hallway blending into another, every turn leading them deeper into the unknown. The air was thick with tension, each second stretching longer than the last. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, the knowledge that there was no escape. No more running. No more safe places to hide. Whatever they had walked into, whatever game they had been caught in, was about to reach its devastating climax. James pulled her into a small, dimly lit room at the end of the hallway, slamming the door shut behind them. He pressed his back against it, his breath ragged as if the very act of hiding was pushing him to the brink. Emily's mind raced, her thoughts swirling around the truths she'd uncovered, the pieces she'd put together, and the ones that were still slipping through her fingers like sand. She glanced around the room, her eyes searching for some clue, some piece of the puzzle she hadn't yet noticed. But everything was quiet, still, too still. The silence was suffocating, and it only heightened the sense that something terrible was about to happen. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she stepped closer to him. "What's going on? Who are they? Why is this happening?" He looked at her with hollow eyes, shaking his head in frustration. "You don't get it, Emily. It's not just about the castle. It's never been about the castle. It's about control, about who holds the power, who gets to decide what happens next. I've been trying to protect you, but he stopped himself, his voice trembling with the weight of unspoken words. Before she could ask him more, the door rattled as something heavy struck it from the other side. James turned sharply, his hand gripping her arm, pulling her back from the door as if they were on the verge of being overrun. The sound of footsteps, hurried and harsh, grew louder with each passing moment. "They're here," he said urgently. "We don't have much time. You need to know the truth. Everything you've seen, everything you've thought, it's all been a lie. This whole thing, this whole mess is about something so much bigger than either of us." Emily's chest tightened as he spoke, and her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure if it was fear, adrenaline, or a mixture of both, but she knew one thing for sure: the truth was something she couldn't outrun anymore. She had to face it, no matter how much it terrified her. James took a deep breath, his eyes dark with the weight of his own internal battle. "There's a reason you've been drawn into this. There's a reason you were given that scarf. A reason you were brought here. The book, the messages, the warnings, they weren't meant to keep you safe. They were meant to push you into the right position, to make you a part of something bigger. You are the key to everything, Emily. You always have been." Her mind reeled. "What do you mean, I'm the key? What's going on? Who's behind all of this?" James took her hands, his grip tight and desperate. "The people after us, after you, they've been watching you for a long time. You've been a part of their plan from the start. But they weren't the only ones. There's someone else, someone much closer to you, who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Someone you trusted." The words hit her like a slap, and for the first time, Emily felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. Someone she trusted. She'd been circling the truth, dancing around it, but now it was finally here, staring her in the face. She felt the blood drain from her face, her breath catching in her throat. "No, it can't be. Gregory," she whispered, the name barely escaping her lips as the weight of the betrayal crashed into her. James' eyes darkened, and for the briefest moment, a flicker of something she couldn't place crossed his face. "Gregory, he's not who you think he is, Emily. He's been working with them this whole time. He's been playing both sides, feeding you false information, manipulating you into making the wrong choices." Emily staggered back as the truth hit her like a freight train. She felt sick, dizzy, her vision blurring as everything she thought she knew collapsed in on itself. Gregory, the man who had shown her kindness, who had warned her, who had made her believe he was trying to protect her. He had been using her. And worse, she had walked right into his trap, just like he had planned. Suddenly, the door to the room splintered under the force of a heavy blow, the sound of wood cracking splitting the silence. James pulled her back, his breath frantic. "Get ready, Emily. We don't have much time." But as he turned to face the door, the unexpected happened. The figure who stepped through the broken door wasn't one of their pursuers. It wasn't the shadowy men who had been hunting them. It was Gregory. His face was pale, his eyes hard, and for a moment, Emily couldn't breathe. It was as if time itself had stopped, and all she could focus on was the twisted expression on his face, the face of the man she had thought she could trust. "Gregory," she whispered, disbelief choking her voice. "No, no, you can't be." Gregory stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate, as if savoring the moment. "You've always been too curious for your own good, Emily. But now, it's too late. You're part of the plan, whether you like it or not." James moved to intercept him, but Gregory was faster, drawing something from his coat. A glint of steel caught the low light of the room, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. "A knife." "Stop," Emily shouted, but it was too late. Gregory's eyes locked onto her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something she couldn't recognize, a sense of triumph. "You never understood," he said quietly. "None of you did. This wasn't about keeping you safe. This was about control. And now, Emily, you're the final piece in the puzzle." Just as Gregory lunged forward, a blinding flash of light exploded in the room, disorienting everyone. Emily's heart slammed in her chest as the world around her seemed to spiral out of control. She heard voices shouting, the sound of a struggle, but everything felt distant, muffled, as if she were drowning in a sea of confusion. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the light vanished. Emily blinked, her vision clearing. Gregory was on the ground, a figure standing over him, their face hidden in shadow. The knife lay several feet away, its blade gleaming faintly in the dim light. The figure stepped forward, and Emily's breath caught in her throat as they revealed themselves. It wasn't someone she had expected, someone she thought she had lost. It was James. He stood there, holding the blade, his face cold, his eyes hard. And in that moment, everything she thought she knew, everything she had fought to understand, shattered into a million pieces. "You were never supposed to know, Emily," he said softly. "But you're right about one thing, Gregory was always the true enemy. And now, it's over." Emily didn't know what to think, didn't know what to feel. She looked between James and the broken man on the floor, and all she could do was wonder who was the real villain here. The weight of everything that had happened crashed down on Emily as she stood there in the dimly lit room, staring at James, the man who had been her ally, her friend, and now she wasn't sure what he was anymore. The knife still lay on the ground beside Gregory, who, though unconscious, was clearly defeated. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension as Emily tried to process what had just transpired. The events of the past days had twisted her perception of everything, of people, of trust, and of herself. What had started as a simple mystery had spiraled into something far darker, something that left her feeling lost in its aftermath. But now, as the reality of it all began to settle, one thing was undeniable: the nightmare was over. James wiped his hands on his jeans, his face a mix of exhaustion and something darker that Emily couldn't quite place. "I never wanted you to be caught up in this, Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of guilt. "But when it all began, when I saw the way you were looking at the puzzle, I knew we were too far gone. You were already part of the game, whether you realized it or not. And I couldn't let it end with you getting hurt." His eyes flicked to Gregory's prone form on the ground, and for a brief moment, the hardness in his expression softened. "I had to end it before it spiraled any further. I couldn't let him use you, not after everything he's done." Emily took a step back, her mind still racing to process the web of lies and manipulation she had been tangled in. She thought back to the moments when everything had seemed so innocent: Gregory's kindness, the scarf, the strange feeling of being watched, the sense that something was off. But it wasn't until everything had exploded into chaos that she had seen the full picture, the conspiracy that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting to consume them all. And James, the one person she thought she could trust above anyone, had been a part of it, too. In the end, he had been the one to save her. But at what cost? She looked at James, her voice trembling but firm. "So, what now? It's over, right? You've stopped him. I don't have to worry about Gregory anymore." The words came out in a rush, a mixture of relief and disbelief, but as soon as they left her lips, she felt the knot of unease still tugging at her stomach. She wanted to believe it was over, that the game had ended, but she had learned by now that things weren't always as simple as they seemed. There was always something more lurking beneath the surface. James nodded slowly, though there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. "Gregory's done. He won't be able to hurt anyone else. But I'm not sure what that means for either of us. I thought I was protecting you, Emily. I thought I could keep you safe from all of this. But now I don't know." He paused, as if struggling with his next words. "There's more at play here, more than just Gregory, more than just us. The people behind this, the ones who've been pulling the strings. I'm not sure they'll let us walk away so easily." Emily's heart skipped a beat. It was exactly what she feared: the promise of safety had never truly existed. It wasn't over. It couldn't be over. Not yet. She felt her mind begin to spiral once again, her emotions rising to the surface, but she quickly shut it down. She wouldn't let herself be consumed by the fear. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. She had come this far, uncovered the truths she'd never wanted to face, and now, it was time to take back control. It was time to choose her own path, even if the world around her remained uncertain. "I don't care," she said, her voice steady, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her calm facade. "I'm done running. I've had enough of this, enough of the lies, enough of the games. If there's more, if they're still out there, then we fight. We face it. I won't let anyone else get dragged into this. Not again." James studied her, his gaze softening for a moment, as if he was seeing her for the first time. A part of him seemed to want to argue, to pull her back into the shadows where she'd be safe, but he said nothing. Instead, he nodded. "All right. But you're not doing this alone. We're in this together, whether you like it or not." As Emily looked around the room, the strange weight that had gripped her since the beginning seemed to lessen just a little. The castle, once an oppressive labyrinth, felt a little less threatening. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the answers weren't all here, maybe the path ahead would still be full of shadows and uncertainties, but Emily knew one thing: she wasn't powerless anymore. She wasn't the victim of a game she didn't understand. She was the one holding the cards now. But as they turned to leave the room, the faintest sound reached her ears. A creak, a shift in the darkness. Her heart skipped, her body frozen for a brief, heart-stopping moment, before she shook it off. It was nothing, she told herself. Just her mind playing tricks on her. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the lingering thread of the mystery she had yet to untangle. With one last glance at the room, she stepped into the hallway, James at her side, and the door to the castle creaked closed behind them. As they walked away, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over, that the answers they had fought so hard for would only lead to more questions. The castle, the scarf, the game, the people who had used her, they were all just pieces of something larger, something darker. But she was done being controlled. The world would know her name. She would uncover the truth, no matter where it led, and no matter the cost. As the two of them disappeared into the night, the camera lingered on the shadowy silhouette of the castle in the distance, its turrets rising against the dark sky. The faint sound of whispers seemed to echo on the wind, and just as the screen faded to black, one final thought struck Emily like a bolt of lightning: maybe the game was never truly meant to end. And in that uncertainty, the story lived on, lingering in the minds of anyone who had dared to follow her journey, just as she had dared to step into the darkness.